All right, looking at macronutrients, right? First part we're going to talk about is going to be carbohydrates, right? So carbohydrates, obviously, very, very important. They are our body's favorite source of energy. And when I say that, like, when we go through our energy systems, it's like sometimes people are like, well, that's kind of weird because, like, why don't we enjoy using fat? Because fat is used primarily in the aerobic system, and the aerobic system gives us way more ATP than the anaerobic system. Plus, we spend most of our time in the aerobic system, right? Like that's our long duration stuff, the stuff that's keeping you upright. We only spend maybe an hour a day if we're working out, like in the anaerobic system. And it's like, yeah. And so the anaerobic system is relying on glycolysis, which is requiring carbohydrates. But you have to remember that glycolysis is still happening in the background behind the aerobic metabolism. You need the byproducts of the glycolysis. You need the byproducts of your anaerobic energy system in order to be able to effectively make ATP in your next energy systems, right? In the oxidative metabolism. So that's one of the that's why it's so important. This is why it's our body's favorite fuel source, because the thing that starts off the whole process, right? Plus, it is able to produce massive amounts of ATP. It just makes them, it makes little bits of ATP very slowly. So it burns up lots of glucose molecules to get a lot of ATP. So definitely a very critical part of our health and very critical part of our performance. Without that energy, we wouldn't be able to have our explosive maximal muscle effort kind of stuff. So we need to make sure that we are getting sufficient carbohydrates if we want to ensure that like we have enough energy to do all of our daily activities, but also we want to make sure that like we can recover from exercise. A lot of times like I'll hear trainers or other people just say very basic nutrition information where they're like, well, you need like carbs before you work out, you need protein after, and it's like both of those things are true. That does not mean like, they're not untrue, but you need a blend of protein and carbs before and after your workouts. You need a blend of both of those things. You need protein before your workout to make sure that like there's sufficient amino acids running in your body so that your body doesn't have to like, it can start the repair process immediately. You need carbohydrates before your workout because obviously that's going to keep your blood sugar levels high enough to be able to like actually physically exercise. And then after your workout, you need protein and obviously to get enough amino acids to kind of fix everything that you damaged during your workout. And you need carbohydrates after your workout to restore your glycogen levels back to whatever it was that they were before you started working out. So yeah, it's not necessarily about the workout you just did. You're not eating carbohydrates to repair the workout you just did. You're actually prepping your body to be able to do your workout tomorrow, which is really important, right? If we're trying to be as consistent as possible. So we do want to have plenty of carbohydrates. We talked a little bit about proteins and carbs there. We also got to talk about fat. Fat is also important, although in the realm of like when it comes to structuring your fat intake near your workouts, if we could actually keep those slightly away from your workout, that would actually be best. And the reason for that is because when you are pushing your when you push your fat intake, fat is one of the first things that your body sort of prioritizes to break down. And so like if we're trying to do like protein synthesis as quickly as possible, we actually kind of don't want to have excessive fat. We actually kind of want it to be later on in the day. That way our body can prioritize restoring our glycogen and fixing any damaged proteins in the body. Although that is getting so specific, it's like, does that actually have very many benefits? I'd be curious to see what that's a piece of wisdom that, we've been throwing around for a long time, but I'd be curious to see like what kind of actual effects it has, if anybody's ever done like a big long-term study on it. So what the heck is a carbohydrate? Well, we've talked about this before. It's an organic compound. It's got carbon. That's where we get the carbohydrate from. That makes up its skeleton. And then it's got oxygen and hydrogen atoms attached to it as well. And this is going to come in two primary categories. You're either going to have your simple carbohydrates, which are, very easy to break down or possibly already broken down, and you're going to have your complex carbohydrates. So of the simple carbohydrates, these are sometimes referred to as like simple sugars sometimes. And so these are actually, that should say simple sugars. This is going to be like monosaccharides, which is literally just a sugar molecule all by itself, or disaccharides, which is two sugar molecules linked together. So if we look right here, you can see here's your list of monosaccharides. That's glucose, fructose, and galactose. Glucose is single sugars that are found like in our body that we're primarily trying to break down. This is the main sort of component of most carbohydrates. You've got fructose, which is the single mono sugar that's found in fruits, and galactose, which is the single mono sugar that's found in milks, okay? Because milk has a lot of sugar in it. I was actually just thinking about that before we started today. I was like, I've been doing like an extra cup of coffee, and I was like, man, that's like really amping my sugar intake. So that's your monosaccharides. And then you've also got disaccharides. Disaccharides are two sugar molecules linked together, right? So disaccharides are where we get two of them. So our examples of that are going to be sucrose, which is sort of the big bad. That's the one that's literally table sugar. And that consists of a glucose molecule attached to a fructose molecule. So when you put those two together, you end up with sucrose. That's why it's so much sweeter tasting, because you're getting a double hit of sugar. And your taste buds are, experiencing that in both ways. Then you've got you've got lactose, which is glucose plus galactose. So put those two together, and you're going to end up with lactose. That, by the way, that double sugar molecule is the one that causes people who have lactose intolerance so much trouble. They don't have the enzyme necessary to break that disaccharide into its individual sugars. So it stays uninterrupted and then starts causing problems. And then there's galactose, and galactose is fructose. Glucose plus glucose. Yeah. So that's two glucoses attached together, and that's your maltose. That's also found in milk. But maltose isn't so bad for us. This is why, like, and sometimes like some people can still get away. Like, it's not quite black and white if you're lactose intolerant. Some people can get away with like protein shakes and be just fine, because the whey that is coming out of like milk, in order to like supply us with lots of protein, doesn't have any lactose in it, or at least it has very little. Or like cheese can sometimes be okay for certain lactose intolerant individuals. Then we've got our complex carbohydrates, and our complex carbohydrates are 3 or more sugars linked together. So this is going to be your starches, glycogens, and fibers, right? So starches are naturally existing complicated carbohydrates that exist in like plants, right? So like brown rice, whole grains, vegetables, all of that's going to have like a lot of like starch in them in the form of carbohydrates, which is why if you look at like a potato, if you look at its nutrition facts, right, if you were to eat 100 grams of potato, you'd get pretty much 0 fat, 17 grams of carbs, 2 grams of protein. And so of that 17 grams, 2.2 grams of it is fiber, 0.8 grams of it is sugar, which means that you're getting about 14 grams of starches in your classic like potato. Now, if we change this to like a sweet potato, you'll notice it's also very darn similar. We go to 100 grams of that, it's 20 grams of carbohydrates with 1.6 grams of protein. So a little less protein and a little bit more carbohydrates. 3 grams of fiber, so a little bit more fiber there. And then 4.2 grams of sugar. It has a little bit higher sugar because it is, a sweet potato, right? So that's, just a slight difference there. It's still, you're still getting 3 grams of fiber, 4 grams of sugar. That's still 13 grams of starchy carbohydrates, which is still really good. You know, so which is better, sweet potatoes or regular potatoes? That's a flawed question. They're both really good. You know. That's what a starch is, right? Complicated carbohydrates that exist in like plants and stuff. And then you have got glycogen, which is also a complicated carbohydrate that's also complex. But this is a starch because it is very similar in its structural makeup. But this is what we are going to find in our body, right? So our body is going to store glycogen. It's going to store glycogen in primarily our liver because your liver is kind of dead center in the body. And it's able to just, you know, get blood to wherever it needs to go. But you're also going to store it within your muscles. And so you'll store a couple pounds of glycogen throughout your body as this, like, you know, fuel source that you have that can be used on the go. Which is one of the reasons why when people go on like low carb diets, they're like, it worked so well. I lost like 6 pounds in the first week. And it's like, well, a lot of that was like, we call it water weight. Glycogen is pretty soupy. It's not a solid the way that like starches that are found in plants are. It's a liquid. And so like there's a lot of water in glycogen. So when you lose glycogen, you lose substantial amounts of water, which means you lose lots of weight, even if it's not necessarily losing body fat. So those are our starches and our glycogens. Then we've also got our fibers, right? And fibers are super complicated carbohydrates they're so complicated, your body can't break them down. So then they pass through the digestive tract pretty much whole. And then that actually grabs any foreign materials and pulls that out of our digestive tract as well. So which is one of the reasons why it's very important to make sure you have plenty of fiber in your diet, you know. We're going to talk about it tomorrow, but we haven't really looked at like the different types of like cancers that are associated. Like that's obviously a disease that we can catch, you know. And a lot of times, you know, the way a lot of cancers get started is they basically are altered cells, right? They're cells that are non-functioning and they're really aggressive in copying themselves and stuff. So how the heck did we like get one of our cells to start becoming non-functional and start copying itself? Well, it needed to have its DNA altered. And DNA is basically made up of atoms, the same way everything in the universe is made up of atoms. And atoms like to share electrons with materials that are around them. So if you end up like consuming something that is not food, then your body just goes, all right, well, I don't know what that is. Put that over there because it's not food, right? So then it just kind of puts some fat cells around it and just kind of stores it there forever. And then because that is made up of atoms, if your body goes, all right, well, you know, that's just sitting there, we don't have to worry about it. But then those electrons start stripping other electrons from their environment because they start binding to them. If any of your DNA gets altered, well, then you have an imperfect blueprint for how to make your next cell. So then you end up making an imperfect cell. And that's what we call that oxidation or oxidative stress. Like I said, we'll look at that tomorrow when we talk about micronutrients. But really dangerous, you know, like that's definitely something we're trying to avoid. So that can happen inside your body if it does get into your bloodstream, but it can also happen in your digestive tract, which is one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we are consuming enough fiber, because we aren't leaving anything laying around in our digestive tract. We are, you know, pulling it out of the body with our unbroken down carbs. So we need that roughage, right? We need, you know, about 25 grams a day for women, about 45 grams or 38 grams a day for men. You know, make sure we're getting enough fiber. And it's hard, honestly, sometimes, like not everybody does. And then for the record, there are some other what are technically considered complex carbs, which are oligosaccharides. These are like, you know, they're not double sugar molecules, but they're also not like 10 or more sugar molecules, but they are still very sugary. And that is things like maltodextrin, which you'll sometimes see in foods, high fructose corn syrup, and regular old corn syrup. Both of those are very, it's a great way to pack a ton of carbohydrates in a very small area. That's why when you look at like, Coca-Cola, if you look at like the ingredients list on it, you'll see first ingredient, carbonated water, second ingredient, high fructose corn syrup. And that high fructose corn, that's what it is. It's what is Coca-Cola? It's sugar water. That's all it is. So not awesome. And no soda's better. All soda's very, very bad. So here's our list, right? Glucose, simple carbohydrates supplies energy to our cells. That's our body's favorite source of fuel. Galactose is the sugars that are found in milk, which can be converted into glucose and then used for fuel. And fructose is the really sweet stuff found in fruits that will be converted into glucose and then used for fuel. You've got your disaccharides, which is, like I said, sucrose. That's two or more sugar. That's two sugar molecules in the form of glucose attached to fructose. You've got lactose, which is glucose plus galactose. I always feel like that's backwards. I always feel like it's lactose and then galactose, but then we'd be galactose intolerant. I'm sure smarter the chemists than me, named it on purpose, but but that's lactose. And then maltose is two molecules of glucose attached together. Your oligosaccharides are, maltodextrins, corn syrups, and then your polysaccharides are starches, which are found in like whole grains, beans, potatoes, yams, vegetables, right? And then fiber, which is found in like certain parts of like oats, which can't be broken down, certain parts of barley, also found in like beans, nuts, and seeds. And then fruits and vegetables, their skin, right? The skin on the outside of like a fruit or a vegetable, has very high starch content, which is why, I grew up eating plenty of mashed potatoes, and they were always very blended and stuff. But, it is definitely better to leave the skin on your potatoes. It ensures that you're getting plenty of fiber. So looking at what carbohydrates' job is, right, shifting the conversation from what they are to why they are. If we're looking at the function of carbohydrates, right, their job is to provide energy, right? That's the first thing we're thinking of. It's like, well, we need carbohydrates because we need calories, right? And so adequate carbohydrate intake is a must. And so they're going to supply us with energy. They're also considered protein sparing, which is a term that you'll see in regards to carbs and fat, right? And protein sparing means that they are, going to protect your body from catabolizing protein, right? If you remember, we don't want to break protein down for energy. We want to use protein to break it down into amino acids so that we have amino acids to repair body tissues, right? That's what we want to do with our protein. If you are not getting enough carbohydrates, your body will break down protein, convert it into glucose, and then use that for energy production, which is really not what we're going for, So these are considered protein sparing, these carbohydrates. Yeah. Oh, they also are acting as the main energy source for your nervous system. Your nervous system, which, is definitely using in short bursts, which again, short bursts, think glycolysis, right? Long bursts, think oxidative metabolism. Your nervous system is like, bam, big burst of energy, and then it relaxes, and bam, it's like, it's a very big bursty thing. So your nervous system pretty much strictly relies on your glycolysis, right? Like it almost strictly relies on, it's very important to make sure that you're getting plenty of carbohydrates to keep your brain healthy. And then it also is helping us to metabolize fats. So remember, we need to do glycolysis first before we kick off our oxidative metabolism. Your oxidative metabolism likes to use fat for fuel, but it has to facilitate that first. And so carbohydrates are actually going to facilitate the process of beta oxidation. Beta oxidation is this process that's a precursor to fat being burned, right? Because what happens if you look at beta oxidation, you can see it's this interesting little process right here where that's actually not going to be very helpful. Where's the other version? Yep, that's what I'm looking for. So you can actually see like you'll have like a fatty acid and it will convert it into acetyl-CoA, right? And that way it can go through like your normal like phosphorylation and create energy and stuff. So we need to convert that into acetyl coenzyme A or acetyl-CoA. That's what we want, that's what's going to kick off the Krebs cycle, which then that'll kick off our oxidative metabolism. So we need to be able to like oxidize a fat first before we can even do that process, which is why we need carbohydrates. This is where you'll hear the phrase sometimes, guys, fat burns in a flame of carbohydrates, because carbohydrates kind of start the fire that allow beta oxidation to occur. This is another reason why glycolysis is taking place in the background behind our oxidative metabolism once we shift into oxidative mode. And consuming plenty of carbohydrates, make sure that you get plenty of fiber, which we talked about how important freaking fiber was earlier, right? It reduces our risk of certain types of cancers because of its ability to clean out your GI tract. The other really great things about carbohydrates is they are often the types of foods that are highly filled with lots of vitamins and minerals, right? So carbohydrate foods are a really great source of vitamins and minerals, right? Like if we look at this list here, this is sort of a list of like simple carbs versus complex, right? You've got like white bread, white pasta, white rice, cakes, cookies, candy, ice cream, sodas, sugary cereals, and sugary drinks, right? Like all of that is just very simple sugars. And if you look, it's like this doesn't have as many like vitamins. Like the process used to like, make it white bread is a process that strips a lot of like, nutrition out of that food. Same thing is true of like white rice, right? That's it. White rice is basically rice that has been bleached and like has lost a lot of its like nutrients. Versus like whole grains, right? Whole wheat bread has a lot of like healthier versions, more vitamins and minerals, like very packed full of like B vitamins. Brown rice, lots of magnesium and things like that. Starchy vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils. Beans and lentils also very high in minerals. Quinoa, very, very good. Sweet potatoes. I love how sweet potatoes gets its own freaking category. It should just be like, potatoes or whatever, but whatever. Sweet potatoes, chia seeds, right? All those are very complicated carbs, which means that they are also a really, really good source of energy, right? That's going to be a really good source of energy. But more importantly, it is a really good source of vitamins and minerals. So how much do we need to consume? How many carbohydrates are we going to need to actually eat? If we know that it's important, well, okay, how much do I need, right? Well, there's a lot of factors that are going to contribute to this. Obviously, the first one is going to be your current body weight. Your body weight is going to determine your basal metabolic rate. The larger a body you have, the more energy your body burns, which means the more carbohydrates it's going to need, the more protein, the more fat, right? So that has a big part of it. And then determining what percentage of your overall calorie intake you want to come from carbohydrates is also a really big determining factor. If you are a super active person who is spending a lot of time in glycolysis, you probably need a really high percentage of your calories coming from carbohydrates, right? Whereas like if you're a pretty sedentary person, you're not doing a lot of high intensity activity, maybe you're going to need a little bit of a lower percentage of your calories coming from carbohydrates, right? Now, carbohydrates are still our body's favorite fuel source. So the rate is still relatively high here, but you could need over half, or you could be just under half of your calories coming from carbs every single day. So those specific metabolic demands are important. And then also like considering your health conditions. If you have diabetes, well, you need to be a little bit on the lower carbohydrate spectrum. So the AMDR, or the acceptable macronutrient distribution range for carbohydrates, is anywhere from 45 to 65% of total caloric intake. So when you are determining like how many carbohydrates you need, ideally it should be anywhere from 45 to 65%. So if you are on a 2,000 calorie diet times 0.45, that means that you need 900 calories of carbohydrates, or 2,000 times 0.65, 1,300. So you need somewhere between 9 and 1,300 calories from carbohydrates each day. If you divide that by 4, because there are 4 calories in every carbohydrate gram, that means that you need somewhere between 225 and 325 calories, or I'm sorry, grams of carbohydrates per day if you're on a 2,000 calorie diet. Let's say you're on a 4,000 calorie diet, you got to double it, the number goes up much higher. And so when we're looking at like the differences in athletes, right? Recreational athletes versus competitive versus endurance athletes, which, we're talking about like marathoners there. Well, your training intensity is going to be a little bit different here, right? Recreational people, it's like, okay, and training intensity is probably very low. But then like in all of these sport versions, like their training intensity is like moderate to high, and so like if you're training more than 4 hours a day, you need a lot of carbohydrates, maybe 10 grams per kilogram of body weight or 12 grams per kilogram of body weight, the average person weighing, let's see, what was it? 149. Yeah, 60, we said 65, let's say the middle 2,000 calorie person, let's say they weigh 140 pounds, that's going to be 65 grams. Well, if they're training 4 hours a day or more, that could require 650 grams of carbohydrates at minimum, right? So times 4, that's 2,600 calories from carbs already, which is where we start to see it's like, all right, well, that didn't work for my 2,000 calorie person. And it's like, of course it didn't. Your 2,000 calorie person is not 2,000 calories. If they're an ultra endurance athlete, they're probably eating a lot more than that. What did Michael Phelps used to say? He used to say he'd eat like 7,000 calories a day, right? Olympic, swimmer Michael Phelps. That's what he claims. I'm not 100% certain how many calories did Michael Phelps eat? I want to say it was 7,000. Is what he would say, like on average. I said 12,000. I mean, maybe, like, maybe on like super intense training days, we'll definitely see that. I've seen like power lifters, how many calories, you look at like Eddie Hall, who is like he's he was on like the world's strongest man. 16,000 calories and a gallon and a half of water every day. Whew, crazy. There's a 20,000 calorie day. That's interesting. But literally just be throwing like as many calories in, because like that's how many calories their body is burning, So it's definitely gonna be based on. Let's talk about our regular clients though. It's probably anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 calories a day. So you could do this version here. I think that this is a good way to check your math if you're picking like the grams of carbs per body weight. But generally what's going to work pretty well, guys, is just choosing an the AMDR, 45 to 65% of your calories. So determine your calories first and then multiply that by either 45 or 65%. That will tell you how many calories of carbohydrates you need. Once you've got that, then you just divide it by 4, and that tells you how many grams. So that is how much we need to eat. Where the heck do we get them from? Well, carbohydrates are, like I said, they're going to come from whole grains, fruits, vegetables, right? Grains, really good examples are things like whole wheat, barley, oatmeal, spelt berries, which is totally a random one. Wheat berries or whole wheat couscous, like those are all really good examples of like whole grains, right? And whole grains are great. They're a really good source of carbs. And then also we've got like fruits and vegetables, and fruits and vegetables can come in a lot of different forms. You can get them in a can. It's not necessarily terrible. You can get them fresh. Obviously, that's really great. You can get them frozen, which sometimes is even better than fresh. You can get them in, juiced fruits, although that's going to be, a combination. That's going to obviously be a blend of complex and simple sugars. And then you can obviously get them from just like vegetables in general, right? So I did just say like canned vegetables can be fine. Yeah, certain canned vegetables actually do have pretty adequate vitamins and minerals in them. Some of it gets lost for sure in the canning process. Make no mistake about it, you know, like they're sitting there in water, and so that water is, you know, sort of stripping out some of those vitamins and minerals. You know, I don't know anybody who's recycling their green bean water, you know. But then we also have like, you know, fresh versions. Obviously, those are going to be packed full of nutrients. And a lot of people would assume that like, you know, fresh vegetables is always going to be better than like frozen. But the thing is, like sometimes frozen locks in the nutrition and basically stops the oxidation process because of the low temperatures, which means your client, you know, you might not have very many nutrients lost, you know. So frozen vegetables actually sometimes have a higher nutrient content than fresh vegetables, because you think about the moment you pick like a stalk of broccoli, you know, it starts oxidizing because it's no longer like living in the ground. And so it starts losing nutrients the second it's picked. It takes a couple days to get delivered to you. You know, in a factory, they would break that broccoli apart, throw it into the freezer, and all that that oxidation process would stop. So frozen broccoli, I think, has been shown to actually have a higher nutrient content than fresh broccoli. Now, how do you know which ones are which? Because some of them are obviously, you know, that's not true necessarily always. Well, that's going to kind of depend on like what the food looks like. What the general rule of thumb I've heard is when you look at a fruit or a vegetable, if it has like a pretty intense like skin on the outside of it, it's probably protected pretty well from oxidization. So you're probably going to get more nutrients out of something that's fresh. But if it doesn't have like a hard skin on the outside, then frozen might be a better option. Like green beans, I feel like they have that, like, you know, they have that outer shell, that outer skin, right? That kind of roughage. You're probably going to get more vitamins and minerals out of fresh green beans. But broccoli is very exposed, right? All the little florets are, you know, completely exposed and stuff. And so like that's gonna, you know, that's maybe not such a better example. Maybe go frozen. So that is, but then again, just get plenty of it. You know, I don't care how you get it. just give me more fruits and vegetables. Everybody does. So there's also like carbohydrates in dairy products, right? We know that like milk and milk products and things like that, yogurts, cheeses, obviously are going to have very, you know, they're going to have sugars in them, which are going to be carbohydrates. They are a little simpler. You know, milk carbs are sugars, so like you need to be cautious about like too much milk in your diet, you know. I will say I've been a big fan. It's expensive, but I've been a big fan of this company Fairlife. They use like they basically double filter their milk. So they run it through like the filtration process, and then they filter it a second time through the filtration process. And if you look, like this is their 2% milk here. But if you look, it's only got 6 grams of sugar in it. Whereas if I just look up like milk nutrition, standard regular old cow's milk, like if you look at 2% milk there, it's going to have 12 grams of sugar in it, right? So it has double. And so like, yeah, this has about half the sugar of regular milk. If I had a diabetic client, this is 100% the type of milk I would put them on if I wasn't able to put them on like an oat milk, you know, or like something like that, which would be very, very, very low sugar. But still very high in protein too. Like there's actually, and this is actually higher protein content. You can see 8 grams here, 13 grams here. So,
yeah,
question.
Day before yesterday, I was in the store with my girlfriend, and she goes, "Oh, Chris buys this one because I'm looking for lactose free." But and so she points to Fairlife, and sure enough, there was lactose free, and so I purchased that one, and it's great.
What'd you think? You like it?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's expensive. I mean, it sucks that
Not that
like
much.
it costs like it costs as much as organic milk. But at the same time, like in my opinion, like I don't care about organic. Like, to be honest, like we haven't really talked too much about that just yet when it comes to nutrition, but like I'm a fan of GMOs, like I know it sounds crazy, but like I am, we're here studying like the science of things, right? Like GMOs are great. They keep our crops, they yield higher nutrient densities a lot of times. However, like don't get me wrong, like if there's like a lot of pesticides and stuff that's not getting washed off of your foods and you're eating, yeah, it could cause problems. Um, but like, if you've ever had a Honeycrisp apple, there's no such thing as a Honeycrisp apple. That's man-made. Like that is a GMO food. Um, so I don't have it. I know it's as expensive as like organic milk, but honestly, I think it's better. I like it way more. Um, I go through a friggin' half gallon of that stuff every week. Because I love coffee. So that is those are our carbohydrates, right? Those are our really good sources there. Now, I should say there are also some carbohydrates that are really high in protein as well. Beans, for instance, nuts, for instance, seeds, soy products, right? Soy is a bean. But all of those are really good examples of like carbs and proteins, which is why if you look at like an Impossible Burger, which is obviously, not made from meat, right? This is made from like plant sources. I think it's soy, but I don't know. So I probably just shouldn't say that. Let's look it up and we'll find out. It is soy. Yeah. So it's made of water and then soy, coconut oil, flour oil, and then lots of like natural flavors and stuff. So when you look at it, it's going to have 14 grams of fat in it, but those are going to, not be, that's not coming from like animal fat, right? That's coming from, um, friggin', plant fats. And then we're going to see like, 9 grams of carbohydrates, 3 of which is fiber, and the rest of it is like starches. And then 19 grams of protein, which is pretty similar to a regular hamburger. Love the Impossible Burger. There's a weird part of me that kind of, I don't know, I kind of like the Impossible Burger more than I like a regular burger now. Or is it the Beyond Burger that I always buy? Ah, crap. I can't remember which one it is. One of those two I really like. It was whatever one they have at Costco. Because we have a lot of barbecues at our place. And so I always make sure that I get like a vegan option just in case we get any, vegans at our like barbecues and stuff. And so, yeah, I always make sure that like we have one and I'll have like an Impossible Burger. And I'm like, these are great. Like I kind of like it better. So that is your protein heavy carbohydrate options. So at the end of the day, guys, oh, and by the way, other sources of carbohydrates, desserts, sodas, cake, cookies, all that crap, right? And that kind of pivots me into, what I'm talking about here. So here's the thing, what type of, which one, what do I need to eat? Come on, tell me, right? Break it down for our clients in the simplest way possible. Honestly, the best thing you can focus on is just try to focus on nutrient dense carbohydrate options, and you're going to be in good shape. You're going to be landing right where you need to land. We don't actually have to get that specific about nutrition information. We all know what we have to do. My parents eat so poorly. Like I love my parents to death. They are so unhealthy in the way that they eat. It's insane. And they don't realize how insane it is. You know what I mean? Like it's like, man, that's a crazy choice that you're making. But at the same time, it's almost like not a choice for them because they just don't know any better. I've told them of countless times like how to, improve this and that and this and that. But like they're like, yeah, but couldn't I just take this like vitamin supplement instead? Like my parents love shortcuts like that. They love vitamins and mineral supplements and shortcuts. And it's like we all and my parents are just like anybody else. They're just like your clients you're going to run into. It's like we all know what we need to do to get a good, source of carbohydrate. We all know what the healthiest versions of things are. We just don't want to do it. Yeah, like, or we either don't want to, or like we just don't put the effort in, right? It's either like active or passive. Some people actively avoid it. Some people passively avoid it. They just procrastinate. It's like, oh, I'll eat healthy eventually, and eventually it never comes. And so when we're trying to tell our clients how to pick carbohydrates, we just want to tell them to focus on nutrient dense carbohydrate options. This is the term that we are going to see for pretty much starting now for the rest of this mod, because we're in the weight loss mod. So when we're telling somebody to pick a food, we're picking nutrient dense food, not energy dense food. Energy dense food has lots of calories and very little nutrients. Nutrient dense food has lots of both, possibly, or maybe it has low calories and lots of nutrients. I know that like people will like they kind of take a dump on like iceberg lettuce. In terms of all the lettuces that are out there, like iceberg is the one that kind of gets the worst rap, because it's like, that's basically like water. So iceberg lettuce actually does have a pretty low nutrient density, but it's a heck of a lot better than like things that have like a high energy density and not as many nutrients. Of course, if you can, spinach is the way to go. Spinach is kind of king, and then there's kale, but yeah. I feel like the kale phase is finally almost over. So when we are analyzing a food, we know that carbohydrates are going to get broken down into sugars, and then those sugars are going to get into our bloodstream, and then that's how we're going to make energy and stuff. How quickly that happens is what we call our glycemic index. Okay, so the glycemic index is a chart, and it classifies carbohydrates based on how quickly they are entering your bloodstream, how quickly they're digested by your digestive system, and then enter into your bloodstream. So if something is very high on the glycemic index, it means that it's going to have a very big impact on your blood sugar levels very quickly. So when we look at like white bread, right, which is highly processed, basically sugars, right? That is going to enter your bloodstream very, very quickly. White rice, same concept, right? Ice cream, Gatorade, sweet potatoes actually enter your bloodstream really quickly, even though sweet potatoes are very good for us. These are all very high glycemic index foods. And that's the thing, when we see like high glycemic index foods, sometimes we're like, oh, well, that means it's bad for us. And it's like, well, not necessarily, right? Like, again, sweet potatoes are a really good example of a high glycemic index food, and those are very good for you. But you just need to use them the right way. If you're trying to like restore your glycogen stores like really quickly, yeah, go sweet potatoes. That's great. That's a great option. Rather than like a super complex carb, which might not actually get your energy levels back to normal very quickly. Post workout, I like a good simple carbohydrate. Maybe not like simple as in like a candy or like sweets or anything like that, but simple in terms of like, a somewhat high glycemic index food. That's great. And then there's sort of the medium side of things. We see like sweet corn, sodas, honeys, bananas, things like that. Bananas are somewhat complex, but not that complex. And then you've got your complex carbs, right? Low glycemic index foods that are going to, impact your blood sugar way less. We got like things like kidney beans, tomato juice, smoothies, apples, things like that. And when it says apples, we mean like apple with the skin on. The fiber is what kind of slows it down. So that's what we're trying to use. We're trying to use carbohydrates effectively, right? If I want a big burst of energy, I'm going to go with a simple carb. If I want like a slow, more sustained burst of energy that keeps me from feeling hungry later on in the day, I'm going to go with a more complex carb. So your body is using that for fuel during exercise, and we want to make sure that we are, metabolizing this, right? So your carbohydrates are supplying you with aerobic metabolism. It's just doing, it's also like using fat as well. And so if you are doing like aerobic exercise, like let's say you're going for a jog for 30 minutes, carbohydrates are supplying you with energy in the background while your body is also oxidizing fat. Now, what point that happens where you switch from like carbs to fat is what we call the crossover point. And this is where fat becomes the main source of energy. As the duration increases and the intensity lowers, fat is going to be more utilized for energy production. So if we think about like how that works, if you look at that respiratory exchange ratio, when you are at the lowest intensity, you're burning all of your energy from fat. When you're at your highest intensity, you're burning all of your energy from carbs. So here you are like asleep. Here you are maybe just living your everyday life. And then here you are like going for like a very gentle jog or maybe going for a walk. And then here we are going through like a harder jog that's maybe a little bit faster paced, getting a little bit out of breath here. Now we're working really hard. Now I'm sprinting as hard as I can, right? So there's a little crossover point there. The fat burning zone is right at the crossover point. It's where your body is basically, the way I always explain it to people is it's like you're burning 51% fat, 49% carbs. You know, it's like it's just at the point where you're crossing over. And that's usually about 65 or maybe a little bit lower percent of your heart rate max. So here's how that's happening, right? Carbohydrates get broken down into glucose. It goes through glycolysis and becomes pyruvate, which becomes lactic acid. And then that pyruvate gets converted into acetyl-CoA, which goes through the Krebs cycle and then eventually goes through the electron transport chain and spits out ATP. Meanwhile, electrons are getting cleaved off this thing constantly. Process you guys have seen. I said yesterday that I wasn't going to talk about this anymore. So glycogen, obviously important. We need to make sure we have plenty of glycogen stored up and saved in our body. You get about 400 to 600 grams worth stored just in your liver and in your muscles. So that's about 1,600 to 2,400 calories worth of energy. So you want to tap out of your glycogen stores, you got to do 24, you got to burn through about 2,400 grams of energy, depending on who you are. So, you know, if you are relying on keto, right? Keto diets, which is primarily relying on fat as a fuel source. I talked about keto. I did keto as an experiment. You know, I had so many people who were just talking about it for so long, and they were like, "How can you judge keto if you've never done it?" And I was like, "That's a really fair statement. I will now do it so that I can argue against it." You know, like, yeah, so you will hear people who go on keto. They get to burn through all your carbohydrate. You need to have no sugar in your blood. You need to have no glycogen. And you need to, and you know, that way your body becomes, they call it fat adapted. But what it means is that your body is going to switch over to burning fat as a fuel source, because it will actually run off of what are called ketone bodies, which are little byproducts of oxidizing fat. So now glycolysis is not really going to be something that my body can do. And instead it's going to rely pretty much entirely on the oxidative metabolism, which means I'm going to have a lot of like really good sustained energy, but my high intensity energy is going to tank a little bit because I don't have glycolysis there. And that's something that I definitely experienced when I did keto. I was like, man, like I've got energy to jog all day, but my sprints are lacking. You know, when I was going to play sports and stuff, I was like trying to kick up and go, and I just didn't have, you know, my normal like really hard, you know, effort kick. And by the way, I felt great during the rest of the day. When I was at like low intensity, I felt awesome. I was like, man, I got plenty of energy, right? And you know, a lot of the food was really tasty because it's like avocado bacon burgers with no bread. You know, like it's like pretty good fatty stuff, you know. Now, is that better? Not really, in my opinion, but I do get how people stick to it. I get that, like people, it's like, yeah, bacon's delicious, you know, and it's very high in fat, so it gets to be part of the keto diet. I can stick to a diet as long as I get to eat bacon, you know, like you see people like that. Okay, great, you know, like yeah, I got nothing against that necessarily, as long as you know you're being cautious about how much freaking saturated fat you're getting. So I think that like the reason the keto is like so popular is it's just a diet that's easy to stick to. But is it more effective? No. Is it less effective? Maybe no, you know, but it's certainly not better. So that's glycogen, right? About 400 to 600 grams of that. You need to burn through that to get started. By the way, when you are burning through that, your body gets real upset. And it will, you know, when you end up with like less than 400 grams, your body goes, all right, we need some carbs. And you start to get a headache. You start to get a little hangry, right? We've all experienced that before. But what happens if like your body decides to try to, you get excess carbohydrates and your body can't store it as glycogen? Well, what it'll do is it will actually convert that glucose into a triglyceride. If your glycogen stores are full, excessive calories from carbohydrates will be converted and stored as fat, right? Average fat cell stores about 90,000 calories worth of energy. That's a whole freaking lot. And that's because fat cells are huge. But if you look at what is called an adipocyte, right, which is a very large cell, it basically stores triglycerides in it. These are all good pictures. I'm not looking for the different types. Yeah, that'll work. I'm looking for like a chart version. So you can kind of see here, right? Here's your, the basically you'll have like it's like a normal cell, but then it will just have this empty little sac where it stores triglycerides. And so, it can spit out those triglycerides, which can be, converted into free fatty acids, right? Which can then go through your oxidative metabolism. So this is how we store that stuff, that's what happens when you get too many carbohydrates. This is another reason why sugars are so bad for us. If you consume like a lot of sugars, which is a lot of grams of carbohydrates that are very quickly broken down, and your blood sugar levels spike, but your glycogen stores are full, you are going to convert that sugar straight into fat. And that is how we make our fat cells. That's why so many people struggle, right? Because we have a very high sugar diet in this country, right? Carbohydrates, really effective fuel source, right? They're very good for like our short period anaerobic glycolysis, but they also can be used, they are being used in the background of our oxidative metabolism as well. Generally, before exercise, try to get some complex carbs about 4 hours before any physical activity to make sure that your digestive system has time to break it down and release those sugars into your glycogen to make sure that it's nice and packed full before you do any physical activity. Make sure you're drinking plenty of fluid because we need water in that glycogen as well. 2 hours prior to exercise, maybe a light meal, maybe a small snack, a beverage, right? And this is like before like sports. Remember, like, if you're working out in the morning, you're like, I can't eat too. Yeah, that's okay, fine. Like don't skip your workout in the morning because you feel like you can't get a good breakfast beforehand. That's a crappy reason to miss your workout. Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. This is talking about like intense exercise. If you're gonna go like play in a pickup sports game or something, make sure you get plenty of carbohydrates a couple hours beforehand, factors that should always be considered, like timing is one, obviously. The types is another, making sure that we're getting, nutrient dense options instead of just energy dense options, right? And then always make sure that like if you are working out for, more than 2 hours, if you're working out and then within 2 hours, make sure you're getting plenty of carbohydrates like into your diet to restore your glycogen. It's not necessarily about the workout you just did. It's about tomorrow's workout. If you empty your glycogen stores because of your workout, and then it's still empty later down the line, your body's going to be hungry. It's going to say, hey, we need carbs. And now you're not exercising. And so if you bring in like a lot of sugars, they might get converted directly into fat. So we definitely want to get some carbohydrates post-workout. Summarizing everything up though, we need adequate carbohydrate intake. It's essential for optimal, performance, right? Generally want it to be about 6 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight. That is 55 to 70% of total calories if you are an athlete. For most of our clients, the number I want you guys to, don't pay attention to this number, pay attention to 45 to 65%, okay? 45 to 65 is how much carbohydrates we need. We've got complex carbs, we've got simple carbs, we got fiber, right? All of them are important. We do still like simple carbs, they're a tool to be used. Glucose is the whole purpose, right? We're breaking down carbohydrates into glucose. in order to like, you know, supply us with energy. Richest sources that we're going to find: grains, fruits, vegetables. We want to make sure we're paying attention to the glycemic index, trying to pick low glycemic foods so that we don't spike our blood sugar levels. And then we want to make sure that we are storing carbohydrates effectively, which means we need to have adequate carbohydrates in our blood. We've, you know, like we've said 100,000 times at this point, right? It's like you need to have carbohydrates. We're just living in a world where carbs have been like villainized, and it's like, look, sugars are the bad guy, make no mistake, but like the actions of sugar are not the fault of carbohydrates in general, you know. Friggin', there's carbohydrates in this picture here, and this is mostly showing fats like nuts and seeds and, you know, avocado. It's got some carbs in it. Good carbs. We love it. All right, let's talk about fats, right? Fats, actually very similar to carbohydrates in terms of their chemical makeup. They're organic compounds: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, right? Very vital, you know, nutrient here. You know, this is, our cell walls are made up of fat, you know, which is really important. And so like, you know, when we consider like light to moderate intensity exercise, we need to make sure that we have plenty of fat in our diet to be able to do that. And so we need to consume essential fatty acids. Essential fatty acids, whenever we see the word essential, it means, hey, this is an essential part of our diet. You need to have this in your diet. And yeah, it obviously can help us meet our energy needs. You know, there's plenty of times where it's like, God, I just need a few more calories. A high fat meal can be a great way to get your calories in for the day. So they supply you energy at rest and during exercise, you know, during like low intensity exercise. They're an energy reserve, which, you know, we've definitely stored plenty of fat in the body. It protects our organs. It is an insulator inside the body. It carries substances around like our fat soluble vitamins. It enhances the sensory quality of food, which is kind of nice. So we actually really love that. Basically, it just means that like fatty foods taste really good. And then actually intaking them can actually improve what's called our satiety, which is a concept that we are going to talk a lot about in our weight loss class. One of the ways you got to combat, you know, somebody who's having a trouble like sticking onto a diet, they need to like consume foods that make them feel fuller longer. High fat foods can do that when part of a balanced diet. So big fan there. You've got three primary types. Oh, and by the way, the AMDR. You want about 20 to 35% of your total caloric intake to come from fats. And then only about 7 to 10% of it to come from saturated fat. So that's one thing you do want to pay attention to, right? Like if you look at like, let's see here. You know, I'm never gonna meal plan. See if I can find a picture with saturated fat. I'm kind of curious if I will. Grams. No. Yeah. All right. So, you know, when you are calculating everything up, you do kind of want to like look at your fat labels. You know, like that's the one thing about like even Fairlife. You know, if you're drinking whole milk, it's very high in saturated fat. You know, the fat content in Fairlife is the same as the fat content in any other milk, right? So when we look at it, you're going to get 5 grams of saturated fat. So this would be very weird, but let's say there's 150 calories in here. Let's say you're going to eat 10, you're going to drink 10 cups of milk a day. Don't do that. But let's say you did, right? That means that like you're getting 5 grams of saturated fat every single time times 10, you're gonna get 50 grams of saturated fat, right? There are 9 calories in every gram of fat, so that would be times 9. That's 450 calories from your saturated fat alone. So if you're on a 2,000 calorie diet, that means that that's 22% of your calories are coming from saturated. That's not awesome. That's a lot of like cholesterols and low density lipoproteins getting into your blood. So we like fat, but we do want to make sure that we're getting a blend of unsaturated and saturated. only about 10% of your total calories should come from saturated fat. We're trying to keep that relatively low. That's one of the best ways to keep your heart healthy. So lipids or fats, right? We got three primary versions here. We got triglycerides. It's a glycerol molecule of 3 fatty acids. We got phospholipids. It's a glycerol molecule with 2 fatty acids. And then we got sterols, which are fatty acids that have little carbon rings. And these are, your precursors to your steroids. So like making like testosterone or estrogen, right? We need fatty acids in order to make that happen. So we're a big fan, right? We're a big fan of like making sure that we get plenty of sterols in our diet, then when we look at the actual so then zooming out, if we look at like our fatty acids, when we're talking about like consuming a triglyceride food, we are going to either see that our fatty acids are saturated or they are unsaturated. Okay, so when you look at the difference here of a saturated fat versus an unsaturated fat, when I say it's saturated, I mean that it is saturated with hydrogen. So if you think about like we've got this carbon dining table here in the middle and all of these seats for hydrogen, if every seat is taken, that's a saturated fat. And if it's got a little kink in it, which means there's empty seats at the table, right? That's unsaturated fat. Unsaturated fats, because of those little like double bond kinks that they have, they don't stack quite as efficiently, which is why they are liquid at room temperature. So saturated fats contain filled hydrogen binding sites. These are usually solid at room temperature because of that. And these are highly associated with like animal sources, right? So you think about like consuming like eggs or chicken or like beef in particular, beef for sure. That's a very, that has a lot of fat in it. Look at like, when you look at like beef in the grocery store, you see all the marbling that it has. That's a lot of saturated fat. So highly associated with animal sources. Unsaturated fats are, a hydrocarbon chain with a double bond in it, which gives it a little kink there, and that keeps it from being solid at room temperature. So this, there's two versions. There's mono unsaturated, which means it has one kink, and then there's poly unsaturated, which means it has multiple kinks, right? Mono for one, poly for many. So these can be a really good source of like your essential fatty acids as well, like those phospholipids and sterols that we need to have. And so we really like to make sure that most of our diet is consisting of unsaturated fat. So like we are getting that from, oil sources and things like that, right? So if you take a look right here, there's definitely some fat in both versions, right? There's fat in that bacon, which you can see is all very solid, right? That is very much saturated fat. And then you can see like olive oil over here, nuts and seeds and fish, which all tend to be kind of oily. They have a lot of like unsaturated fats in them. And then there is one that we haven't talked about a lot just yet, which is very, very bad for us, which are trans fats or hydrogenated oils, okay? So hydrogenation is the process of basically taking an unsaturated fat and adding a bunch of hydrogen to it. So you took an unsaturated fat, which had a little kink in it, and then you straightened it out and shoved extra hydrogen in there. And that is not good for us. I'm not a big fan of telling people what not to eat. I'm a big fan of telling people what to eat. But the one thing I will say is that you should absolutely avoid triglycerides. They don't even exist in nature. So how the heck do we hydrogenate our food? We superheat it. So if you were to take like a healthy oil, like peanut oil, for instance, which is probably the most popular, and then you took it up to boiling, and then you dropped a piece of chicken in it, it's going to give it this really crispy skin, and all of that hydrogenated oil is going to enter it. Fried foods are how we hydrogenate stuff. Now, why do we start doing this? Well, number one, it tastes really good. And number two, hydrogenation does give food a super long shelf life. So trans fats are extremely bad for us. Our body does not know what to do with them effectively. And it can actually destroy your good fats. It can destroy your hormones. Um, trying to find some, yeah, there we go. So it's like, saturated fats, not very good for us, right? Trans fats, exceptionally bad for us. Lots of like baked goods and processed foods and crap like that. And then you get your monounsaturated and your polyunsaturated. Monounsaturated, very, very good. Polyunsaturated, very, very, very good. So that's kind of a list of like our different, that's sort of the large version of our fats, right? We want to definitely avoid that those hydrogenated oils. And what sucks is they have to put trans fats on nutrition labels now. They have to list the grams of trans fat inside foods now. Like you can see here, right? 9 grams of fat, 2 grams saturated, 1.5 grams of trans fat. But then look at this one. This cookie, I'm assuming, has 7 grams of fat, 4.5 of which are saturated, and 0 grams trans fat. So you might think that you're in the clear, but then if you look at the ingredients list, it's enriched flour, riboflavin, sugar, and partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, cocoa, cornstarch, and then hydrogenated oils. When you see that, it means that they took an unsaturated fat and they superheated it. This is probably like a Girl Scout cookie or something. Soy caramel color. It's like caramel and cocoa. Yeah, some type of cookie, I'm sure. Very bad for us. But if it has less than 1 gram in it, they are able to round it down and say, hey, it's got 0 grams trans fat. So we got to avoid anything that says partially hydrogenated, blah, blah, blah. It gives it a very long shelf life because, even bacteria is like, I'm not eating that. Like, I'm going to show you guys a video in a couple days where we're going to take a look at let's see here, McDonald's hamburger is years old. I'm going to show you this video of this guy who has kept a McDonald's hamburger for over 20 years. And it basically looks exactly the same. You ever drop a French fry, and then it falls in between like your car seat, and then you find it like weeks later and it looks exactly the same as the day you bought it, right? Bacteria doesn't even want to eat that food. That's fried, hydrogenated foods. Definitely something we are trying to avoid. It gives them a really long shelf life, but is definitely not good for us. So now talking about your essential versus your non-essential fatty acids. This is very similar to essential versus non-essential amino acids. Essential, whenever we're talking about biology, means that you need to eat them. Okay, this is going to be your linoleic acid and your linolenic acid, aka your omega-3s and your omega-6s, or maybe you'll even see like your DHAs in there. So Lorianne, we were just talking about like, drinking like Fairlife milk. One thing that you can get at Fairlife from their whole milk, and I think they're 2%, is you can actually get it with DHA omega-3s added to it, right? And so those omega-3s, how does that have that in there? It just means that they're feeding like grains to the cows. They're feeding like whole grains to them. Or maybe they're just adding it synthetically. But you will often see DHA added to like milks and stuff. And that's really good. Like those are really good sources of like, omega-3 fatty acids, which are very, very good for our nervous system because those are phospholipids that are going to make up our cell walls. So we definitely want to make sure that we have plenty of DHA in our diet. What's a really good other source of DHA? Well, okay. That's actually not what I thought I was going to get. essential fat. Okay, there we go. Boop. Well, there's a lot of really good sources out there, but again, they are usually associated with like your liquid oils, right? So omega-3s, you can get them from flaxseed, you can get them from beans, walnuts, kidney beans, pecans, salmon, leafy greens. Sometimes we'll have them, squashes. You know, all of your healthy fats are going to be really good examples of like omega-3s. And omega-6s, right? Interesting. That's not what I want to see. Omega-6. Yeah. So for the record, like omega-6s are also an essential fatty acid, but we get plenty of these. We actually get a lot of omega-6 in our diet, which is why we're seeing like fast foods, snacks, firm tofu, walnuts have like omega-6s. There is a lot of omega-6 in these versus omega-3s, which we tend to like not get quite as much of. And so you're going to get omega-6 in like a lot of processed foods. You're going to get omega-3s in a lot of like unprocessed foods. So which one is better for you? Well, you need a good ratio of both, right? Actually, this is great. You need a pretty healthy ratio of both of these. If you're getting way more omega-6s than you are getting omega-3s, one of the weird things that our body does is this has been shown to create like different types of like inflammation inside the body. And that inflammation, you know, that's aches and pains and definitely not great for us. So yes, make sure you're getting plenty of like, make sure that you are getting plenty of like oils in your diet. But now it's like, all right, well, we also need to be a little bit cautious about like overdoing it on the omega-6s, which is why you want to go with the things like olive oil, which has a really healthy, much healthier oil when compared with like vegetable oil. Vegetable oil is got good fatty acids in it. It's got omega-6s, but it has very high levels of it. And so it's like you get 10 times more than you need. And then that's not so good for us anymore. Again, health is complicated, you know, but the best thing you can do, get cold pressed olive oil juice. Avocado oil is really good to cook with. One of the ways that I like to basically pick like oils and stuff is to pick an oil that has like a really high smoking point. So when we look at like the different smoking points of different oils, vegetable oil, which I said is high on omega-6s, it's pretty low, right? 400 degrees, and it's gonna, you know, start boiling and stuff, right? But then if we take a look at like avocado oil, there we go. This is what we're looking for. Take a look at like, oh no, that's not what I'm looking for. God dang it. There we go. You look at like processed olive oils, you know, that's going to be a little bit higher at like 428 degrees. But then if you look all the way down here at like peanut oil, 471 degrees, that's not bad. Or you could even see, I can't believe I'm not seeing avocado oil up here. Avocado oil is off the freaking charts. You have to freaking heat it to a bajillion degrees. There it is, 520. 520 degrees in avocado oil. So that's pretty good. I've never had like algae oil or anything like that. That's crazy. But so those are good places. Those are good sources of essential fatty acids. You need to make them in your diet, but yes, try to get more omega-3s than you're getting omega-6s. Honestly, guys, the best way, fish. Eat freaking fish. Fatty cuts of fish. Fish is so good for you. It's so many great sources of like omega-3 fatty acids. And then the fattiest cut of fish that I can think of is salmon's really good. And then there's the ones that I'm not like sardines. What's the other one that's like sardines? Oh, God dang it. Anchovies. Anchovies, sardines, both those are also really, really high in omega-3 fatty acids. I'm not a big fan, but you know, I love salmon. So those are your essential versus your non-essential fatty acids. Then you've got phospholipids, right? Phospholipids, those are going to be too little monoglyceride or too little fatty acids attached to it. These are making up your cell walls. So we definitely want to make sure we're getting plenty of that in our diet because, like, again, that's making our cell membranes. And then sterols, right? These found in plants and animals. These are actually acting as precursors to our hormones. This is where, if you've ever seen like, you know, soy and estrogen, sometimes you'll see, like, you'll hear people say like, oh, you can't eat soy. Soy is very bad for you. It has estrogen in it. And so it's like, if you're a guy and you're eating like soy, you're going to grow man boobs. Yeah, you can see it. That's totally what this picture is indicating here. No. It does have little what are called like phytoestrogens in it. There are little bits of estrogen that are found in soy products. Make no mistake about it. But the amount of freaking soy that you would need to boost your estrogen levels to dangerous levels is like, you would need to drink like 10 gallons of soy milk every day in order for it to have any effect. Like, they were injecting, they found this because they were injecting mice with soy and they were feeding them like a soy diet. But they were injecting, I mean, like literally like 10 times as much. It might even be higher than that, actually. I think 10 times, I might not be exaggerating enough. I think it was even more than that. It was like, maybe it was 10 times their body weight in soy. I don't know. It was something, it was insane. And so it's like, oh yeah, I can't. So I'm like kind of like going a little heavy in how much I hate talking about this, but like, I'm just so kind of tired of reading people being like, don't eat soy. Soy is bad for, you know, like, I'm just, it's annoying. It's fine. I don't really personally like soy very much. Like, there's not a lot of soy like tofu products, and there's not a lot of like products like that I'm a big fan of. You know, I like an Impossible Burger, you know, because it tastes like a real hamburger. But like, I can't even think of the last time I'd enjoy like a garden burger, you know. But still, the conversation's dumb. And then we got cholesterols, right? Cholesterols also giving structure to our cell membranes. They also help us generate vitamin D, which is really freaking important. It's one of your essential fat-soluble vitamins, right? So we definitely need to make sure that we have cholesterol in our diet, but the two different versions of that cholesterol are either going to be the good stuff or the bad stuff, right? The bad stuff is your low density cholesterol. This is, you know, the type of cholesterol that goes around and basically clogs up your arteries. There's also very low density cholesterol, which is like associated with like trans fats. And this is why trans fats have been shown to literally destroy your good fats. So it's like, it's not just that trans fats are bad for you, it's that they're bad for you and then they kill your good stuff. That's as bad as it gets, right? Avoid trans fats. Highly associated with cardiovascular disease. HDL cholesterol is the good stuff. This is associated with like good proteins. And this is where it's like, well, are eggs good for us or eggs bad for us? Eggs are high in cholesterol, but there's an argument to be made that they're high in the good types of cholesterol, which is why we've been debating about eggs for freaking decades. We're also starting to find that the cholesterol in food sometimes doesn't even affect the cholesterols in your body. It's more about like your overall diet and activity levels. And we're finding it's more associated with your fiber intake and stuff. So it's interesting, man. Like, the conversation on cholesterol, it's like, do we need to be afraid of cholesterol? No, I don't think so. Don't just avoid cholesterol foods. Just try to make sure that you're eating healthy sources of fats, lower in saturated. If you're keeping your saturated fat intake below 10%, you're keeping your cholesterol levels at normal ranges as well. You got nothing to worry about. So, here's our fat recommendations, right? 20 to 35% of your total calories, with only 7 to 10% of your total calories coming from saturated fats, and then the rest of it coming from unsaturated sources. Make sure that you're getting plenty of omega-3s and omega-6s per day. And the best way to do that is to make sure that, like, you're, again, eating healthy fats. Chances are you're going to be landing where you need to land. But here's an example of like omega-3s, right? Mackerel, flounder, shrimp, cod liver oil, salmon oil, all of those things are really good sources of omega-3s. But then we see like flaxseed. Yeah, don't be wrong. Like flaxseed's also a really good example. If you're going for like a vegan option, flaxseed can be where it's at. Or walnuts, walnut oil, soybeans, canola oils, things like that will also have it. But these are, kind of low levels. And it's like, so, we like the fatty fish. Salmon's my favorite. Salmon is the one I like to go with. I've never actually used, like, I don't know, salmon oil or cod liver oil. You can take those as like a supplement. You can buy those at the store. It's a very popular supplement amongst people. And it is, packed full of omega-3s. So is it good for us? Yeah, probably. But can you get it from your diet? Yeah, probably. So different amounts of fats, by the way, found in certain foods. So shifting gears, looking at where we're going to find these fats in our diet, right? You're going to find them in whole grains. Those will sometimes have some unsaturated fats in them, pretty low levels, but like flax is a grain, and if you're eating like flaxseed bread, yeah, it's going to have some fat in it. You're going to find some in biscuits and croissants where they're adding a ton of butter and oil to a lot of flour, and then they're baking at the super high temperatures, which those super high temperatures are now taking that oil and turning it into freaking trans fats. So biscuits, avoid them. McDonald's breakfast sandwiches, that is an egg with bacon and a freaking biscuit. All bad in terms of fats. I mean, the egg is somewhat okay. And the bacon would be fine in levels below 10% of your total caloric intake, but the biscuit is bad. Fruits and vegetables, usually very little fat. Very, very little found in like most fruits and vegetables. Like broccoli has some fat in it, but it's such a low level, we don't even look at it. Your primary source should be like oils, right? Oils are a really good source of all of our healthy ones, right? Cold pressed olive oils, avocado oil, things like that. Flaxseed oil, if you want to cook with that. I've never cooked with that, but I have it. I use flaxseed oil for seasoning my cast iron pans. Dairy is a good source of fat, but it's a good source of saturated fat. So usually that's going to give you about 8 to 10 grams of fat per serving, with about 5 grams of it being like saturated. So be cautious with that, but it can be a good source. We need some saturated fat. Saturated fat can be a fine part of your diet. We just don't want to overdo it. And we live in a world where we often overdo it. So it's been kind of villainized. We have to spend our time saying, hey, don't eat this stuff. And it's like, really? Never? And it's like, well, no, not never, but like not as much as everybody else, And then proteins, high protein foods are often highly associated with fats as well, usually associated with those saturated fats, right? Like red meat, very high in fat, like friggin' look at ground hamburger, right? Ground beef. If you're eating 100 grams of it, right? 30 grams of fat and only 14 grams of protein, with 11 of it being saturated. So 11 times 9 divided by 2,000. That is 49% of the saturated fat you should be getting in per day. Not awesome. Not awesome at all. So we're definitely trying to keep those levels relatively low. Poultry sometimes has fat in it, like chicken breasts tend to be a little bit lower, but chicken legs tend to be a little bit higher. And then fish is a really good source of fat as well, but usually it's the omega-3 fatty acids. So we really like fish in terms of what type we're getting. And then, like I said, we got cholesterols, which are the sterols that we talked about earlier, found in like animal products, right? Good sources: meats, eggs, dairy products, and then baked goods that have eggs and dairy products in them, which is, you know, pretty much all baked goods. Very high in cholesterol, right? So when we're looking at it, we're looking at what your total cholesterol levels are. That's your HDL plus your LDL plus your triglycerides. If those levels are really high, that could indicate that you are at risk for cardiovascular disease. You've got the HDL, that's the good stuff. And then you get the LDL, that's the bad stuff. LDL is the stuff that clogs up our arteries, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid there. And then if we're talking about utilizing fat for fuel, we talked about this earlier, but remember, generally fats are metabolized during low intensity, long duration exercise, right? The higher the intensity, the more carbohydrates are going to supply us with the energy, right? So we're going to break fats down into fatty acids, which will then go through beta oxidation and convert it into acetyl-CoA. Once it's acetyl-CoA, boom, citric acid cycle, right? And then the electron transport changes like normal. But it has to do this first. And you're going to be left with, you know, these ketone bodies, and your body's going to go into ketosis, and it's going to rely primarily on fat as an energy source. That's fine, you know. But to argue that it's better is, like, I think, falsely supplying information. So before exercise, try to keep your fat like relatively low. And then after exercise, try to keep your fat relatively low. So we're trying to keep fat somewhat away from our workouts. Just because like fat is going to slow down how quick your body is going to restore glycogen and how quick it's going to go into like protein synthesis. So if we're prioritizing like building muscle right out of the gym, yeah, we want to keep the fat kind of away from it, you know. But later throughout the day, make sure that you're getting plenty of fats in your diet. It's a, you know, vital part of our diet here. Very important, right? High fat diets have not been shown to improve your endurance, by the way. You know, you might think that like, oh, okay, well now I can eat, you know, lots of fat because I'm going to go run a marathon. And it's like, you actually need carbs before you go run a marathon, because you got to do the beta oxidation first, which requires some freaking carbohydrate flame before you can oxidize those fats. And you have tons of fat stored in your body, tons of calories worth of fat stored in your fat cells. So your fat intake doesn't need to be high to improve your endurance. Although that is, you know, again, that's a marketing thing with like the keto diet. Yeah. Next one we got to look at is protein. How you guys feeling so far? Been a while since I checked in. I'm getting a lot. You know, it's a big one today, so I'm like moving quick. Feeling good. All righty. Let's look at protein. So protein, obviously really, really important. I pulled up this video yesterday. I freaking love this. This, I just always thought this was so funny. This is what everybody who talks about like, you know, body. There was this old protein ad, and I just thought it was so funny back in the day.
Hey, I got you got a protein shake.
Awesome. I love protein.
I know you love protein. I love
protein too.
Yeah, protein rocks. Are you guys talking about protein? I love protein. I love protein too.
We know you love protein. Protein rocks.
Awesome. Protein rocks.
Protein.
I just, that is honestly, that's what it sounds like in the freaking, it's like, you only need to make sure you're getting enough protein. It's like, no, again, like, we need all of it, you know, like, it's all important. But don't get me wrong, like, protein is important, you know, like, make no mistake about it. But just because you eat lots of protein doesn't mean you're gonna look like those guys, you know. So essential nutrient, absolutely important. You know, we can metabolize it for energy, although we try to avoid doing that. But we need protein on a regular basis to ensure that like we are repairing our body's tissues. You are made of a lot of protein. Proteins in your skin, hair, nails, muscles, teeth. There's proteins in your blood cells. You know, the hemoglobin, that's a protein. You need a lot, you know, DNA, every freaking piece of DNA you have is made up of protein. We need protein. So how do we make a protein? How do we assemble them? Well, we need to make sure that we are getting essential amino acids, right? So what a protein is a complex chain of these amino acids, which are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, plus a little bit of a nitrogen skeleton. That nitrogen skeleton is what gives them their unique shape. They're held together with what are called peptide bonds. Peptide bonds are basically just a stronger bond when compared with like a carbohydrates regular old like covalent bond. So like basically a peptide bond is what's linking your amino acids together. So you can see here's an amino acid, right? This is one of the, this is kind of just a generic amino acid, right? But see here, there are two very different amino acids, and that's because of this little R group right here. That R group can have 20 different variations, and those 20 different variations determine your 20 different amino acids. So the shape of the protein determines its function. Actin and myosin proteins are really good at binding together and then contracting and pulling and sliding, right? DNA is really good at unwinding itself and transcribing itself as a blueprint for the next, for more proteins to be assembled. Certain enzymes are really good at kicking off chemical reactions. So protein constitutes our bones, ligaments, tendons, hair, fingernails, muscles, teeth, enzymes, organs. We're made of a lot of proteins, right? So we need to have like a lot of different types of proteins in the body. We need to have a lot of different combinations. One of these is also going to be enzymes, by the way. Enzymes, those are the catalyst for, certain chemical reactions to take place. Lactase, right? Like that's an enzyme that your body can create. Or salivary amylase or pancreatic amylase or lingual lipase. All of those are enzymes in your digestive tract. Your body is excreting those so that you can break foods down and get them into the body, right? Well, you also have enzymes throughout like the inside of your body running around as well, that are allowing things to happen. So for instance, acetyl-CoA, right? That's kicking off these chemical reactions. They are, and then there's all of those little kind of coenzymes, right? In the Krebs cycle. Look how many freaking enzymes there are. A lot of them, right? So enzymes are really, really important, right? They are the catalyst for our chemical reactions to take place. So when we're talking about, protein inside the body, look at all the various shapes that we can have. It can be our hormones, antibodies. It can help like maintain our fluid balance by pumping fluid in certain areas. Transporters, obviously your muscle is made up of proteins. And then it can also be used for energy. You can metabolize amino acids for energy, although your body tries not to. We don't want to use amino acids for energy. We want to use amino acids to repair body tissues, right? So of these amino acids, there's either going to be essential or there's going to be non-essential. Essential ones are the ones that have to be obtained by your diet, right? Histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. All of those are your essentials. I don't know why I listed those off. I'm not doing that for non-essentials. Those are all your essential amino acids, right? Your non-essential ones, your body can make those. Okay, your body can synthesize those. Now there is conditionally essential, which are these are non-essential that suddenly become essential if you don't have enough like leucine in your diet, which is an essential amino acid. So like they're kind of in the middle, but honestly you can think of them as non-essential. So these are typically associated with either like what we call like a complete protein or an incomplete protein, right? Oh, actually, hold on. Really quickly, because everybody asks about it. Yeah, it's not in the PowerPoint. What about BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, okay? These are amino acids that can be metabolized for energy within the muscle. You will see these sold as a supplement. BCAA supplements are very popular in the weightlifting world. The idea here is that you are getting plenty of amino acids, which makes it easier for your body to metabolize energy and make new muscle. There is not a lot of evidence to suggest that it does anything, though, if your protein levels are adequate. Your BCAAs are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. But if your body has plenty of those in your diet from just a regular protein intake, boosting your protein, your BCAA levels doesn't really do anything. So then talking about food instead of just talking about like, our amino acids here, are we getting like a complete protein or an incomplete protein? Well, a complete protein is a protein that has all essential amino acids. Most animal product or all animal products, and then soy and certain types of grains actually do count as complete proteins. Just means that they have all of the amino acids present. Animal sources, that would make sense, right? Eggs, dairy products, meat, fish, things like that. It makes sense that they're complete proteins because it's an animal's body that you were eating, which means that that animal's DNA assembled all 20 proteins. Plant sources will typically be missing one or more amino acids, one or more of the essential amino acids. So you need to consume a variety of those to ensure that you're filling in the gaps, right? Like beans are missing a few, legumes are missing a few, but if you eat them together, now suddenly you've got a complete protein. We call that a complementary protein. For the record, there are some plant sources that have all 20 amino acids, soy products. That's why soy is so popular. And also like quinoa is another really good one. Certain fermented foods that I can't think of the name of right now are also really good examples. And then we sometimes see this term high quality protein. High quality protein is basically a protein that's easy to digest and is a really good source of amino acids. High quality proteins, all you got to do to make sure you're getting a high quality protein is just make sure it's like relatively lean and not, processed with like a bunch of other crap, because it's like if you look at like, even if you look at like a power bar, you'll sometimes see like, yeah, it's got some protein in it, like 11 grams of protein in this bar, but it's also got like lots of carbohydrates and lots of fat in it. Your body might prioritize breaking all that other stuff down first. So, maybe that's not as simple as something that might be a higher quality version, like a chicken breast, Now, whey protein powder is incredibly high quality because it's already so easily broken down and absorbable into your bloodstream. That's why whey protein powder has been shown to be a very effective supplement in the bodybuilding, weightlifting world. We like whey protein. I'm a big fan, it's been proven in countless studies to be effective because of just how easily digestible it is. So it's a very high quality protein. Do you have to use whey protein? No, you can always go with a vegan option. Just make sure it has a complete amino acid profile. Then we've also got incomplete proteins, right? We're missing them, right? But we can always do complementary proteins where we combine 2 or more incomplete proteins to fill in that amino acid profile, right? So in animal products, got all of them, but grains plus legumes, there you go, full profile. Grains plus nuts, there you go, full profile. Beans plus nuts, full profile. You can absolutely get the same amino acids on a vegan diet. So when we're talking about eating adequate levels of protein, what we're talking about is trying to ensure that we are getting proper cellular growth, right? We want to put ourselves in what is called a positive nitrogen balance, which is kind of just a nickname. When you think about like, you remember, like we got proteins have amino acids have nitrogen in them. So what we're really saying is like we need a positive amino acid balance, right? But we call it a positive nitrogen balance. So what that means is it's like balancing the books, right? Like if you were in a positive energy balance, that means you're consuming more energy than you're burning every day. Well, a positive nitrogen balance means that you're consuming enough protein to repair any cellular damage that you create every day. So if I created some cellular damage by working out, I need to make sure that I'm consuming adequate protein to repair any of that damage that I created. I need, let's say I damaged 10 grams of protein. I need to consume 10.1 grams of protein to make sure I'm in a positive balance, So that's what a positive nitrogen balance is. It occurs when the dietary input of nitrogen in the form of protein equals or exceeds the output of nitrogen in the form of like cellular damage. In order to ensure that you're doing that, you need to consume this much protein per day. This is why, rather than just saying, yeah, you need 20 grams of protein a day or 50 grams of protein, whatever, rather than just saying that, you're basing it on your client's body weight. Again, Eddie Hall, big freaking world's strongest man, you know, that man has a lot of protein on his body. That is a lot of protein that can be damaged every day. So his nitrogen, to be in a positive nitrogen balance, he probably needs more than the average person, right? So sedentary individuals, this is the number you want to have memorized. It'll be about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. But strength athletes might need all the way up to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. For weight gain, weight loss, yeah, somewhere between, these are kind of our numbers, right? Basically, the way I like to do it is like, if you're trying to ensure that you're getting in a positive nitrogen balance, just go with 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, Like I weigh 180, right? That's 81 kilograms times 2. I need about 163 grams a day. If I'm getting 163 grams of protein a day, I'm in a good spot. I'm always going to be in a positive nitrogen balance. Now, on really hard days, do I need more than that? Yeah, maybe a little, but for the most part, like that's going to serve me really, really well. So the recommended amount is 0.8 grams per kilogram. That's for sedentary individuals. That's the normal cellular damage that you experience in a day, doing the dishes, driving to work, walking your dog, normal sedentary lifestyle, about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So what are the factors that affect our protein intake? Well, your current body weight is a big one, right? The more you weigh, the more protein you're going to need, right? But also like your total energy intake, like if you're consuming a lot of calories, maybe some of those calories are, if you don't want to spike up your carbohydrate levels, or if you don't want to spike up your fat levels, maybe you can make up for that with protein. So now that affects your protein intake. Or it could be your training intensity. The harder you work and damage proteins, the more you need to consume. So we need to have sufficient protein intake. If you're trying to gain weight or lose weight, that's going to affect your protein intake. If we're trying to lose weight, it means that we're probably exercising, which means we probably need adequate protein. But also a factor could be your carbohydrate availability. Maybe you don't have access to carbohydrates. So then you need to consume more protein in order to make up for that, because protein can be converted into carbohydrates. We don't want to run into this problem, but that could be a reason to eat more protein. For the record, don't do that. When your body converts protein into carbohydrates, it has to leave the nitrogen skeleton alone afterwards. It can't get rid of it. So then your body has to filter it out, which means your kidneys have to like work harder to do that. If you have kidney problems, high protein could be dangerous for you. So be cautious with that. Also, it'll make your body odor worse because some of it will be lost in your sweat. And so sometimes you can always, it's like, whoo, it smells like a high protein diet in here. Somebody needs some Axe body spray. So exercise intensity, training level, and then another factor that could affect your protein is the quality. If your protein quality is really low, like if you're getting amino acids from crappy sources, you may need to consume, higher levels of protein in order to make up for it, because you're not getting a full amino acid profile. This is also why sometimes vegetarian athletes will often need a little bit even greater protein levels, just in case they're not getting enough of those amino acids, right? The age affects this as well. Younger individuals will usually have higher protein intake because, developing, growing bodies, that's a very important thing. But be cautious of excessively, eating too much protein. If your diet is above 35%, this can hamper your health's performance. It can put stress on your kidneys. It can lead to dehydration because hydrolysis is going to need to break up those amino acids and turn them into glucose, which is going to use up your water instead of using it for other things in your body. It can increase your risk of cardiovascular disease because high protein foods are often associated with saturated fat, which can also increase your risk of certain types of cancers. And it can actually excrete calcium from your bones. You can actually lose bone density from way too high of a protein diet. Because it starts to interrupt how the calcification process. So be a little cautious about that. You know, don't go above 35% of your total caloric intake, which honestly, if you're on a 2,000 calorie diet, that's 175 grams a day. That's a lot of protein if you're a sedentary individual, you know? So good sources of protein, whole grain bread can sometimes have it, brown rice, certain pastas will actually be somewhat high in protein. Certain fruits and vegetables sometimes have little bits of protein in them, but some of our best sources that are very rich in protein are dairy or certain alternative to dairies, you know, like soy milk and yogurts and things like that. Cheese could be a really good example. But then obviously like meats, fish, poultry, eggs, all of those are really good examples, right? Animal products are obviously a good example of protein, but also beans, legumes, nuts, seeds are really good examples. Like, you know, there's a lot of protein in like almonds and walnuts and things like that. Now, you know, you will hear marketing claims associated with protein all the time, right? We just watched that little funny commercial, right? You'll hear that like protein will give you a greater muscle building capability. Maybe, but not always. You know, you have to like make sure that you are triggering a muscle growth situation in order for that to happen. So you'll hear of like, you know, there's protein bars out there, protein shakes, powders, pills out there. You know, should you take those? Not really, not if you're getting adequate protein. But if you're having trouble getting enough protein in, like Bae, we were talking about this a couple days ago, right? If you're having trouble getting protein in, protein shakes are a really great source. The one that I like, because you said you do the vegan protein. I really like this company here, Vega. They make a really good vegan protein. Mixes really well, tastes really good. You know, popular stuff. So there's a lot of really good sources out there, but that can be important, you know. Some people do need protein as a supplement. You know, Lorianne, we were talking about Every Table the other day, that meal plan service. You know, if you put together a meal plan, those have some protein in them, you know, but maybe that's not enough. If you need 175 grams, you know, that's hard to get from food. So you might need actually higher levels than that. So when it comes to the necessity of protein, right? Sufficient protein is obviously required in order for your body to be able to like repair any tissues, right? Make sure that you are getting plenty of protein. But when it comes to consumption before exercise, you want a little bit. That way your body starts digesting that and then has some amino acids ready, and it can start protein synthesis before you even leave the gym. But then within 1 to 4 hours, so with 1 to 4 hours, get like a lean protein source. Try to balance it with plenty of carbohydrates as well, because we know carbohydrates is what's going to give us energy for that activity. But then after exercise, anywhere from 6 to 20 grams, guys, is enough to ensure protein synthesis. It really doesn't take any more than that. I know that, you know, powders and stuff will have like 30, 40 grams of protein per serving. You don't necessarily need that much every single time. 6 to 20 grams could be enough. Now, don't get me wrong, I will often do more than that just because I'm trying to ensure that like I'm getting adequate protein grams per day. So if I'm like, man, I need like 50 extra grams from a protein powder, yeah, I might do like 25 in the morning and 25 at night, you know? And that's definitely beyond 6 to 20 grams there. But is that really like a dangerous level that's going to be converted into like, you know, urea and things? No, probably not. So very essential for athletes, also untrained individuals, you know. We need to make sure that we're getting a full amino acid profile, which means we need all 20 amino acids present in our diet, or at least all of the essential amino acids present in our diet. We're going to monitor our nitrogen status by basically analyzing our activity level and body weight, making sure that we are in a positive nitrogen balance. Good sources of protein include like dairy, or alternative. If you're a vegetarian, you can do dairy. If you are full vegan, there's also a lot of really good, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, and soy products are obviously a really, really big one. Whether or not you need a protein supplement, that is up to you and the client, right? That is an individual to individual basis. I don't say everybody needs protein, but I will say like protein has been shown time and time again to be an effective weightlifting supplement. And before activity, you need a combination of proteins, fats, and carbs, low on the fat though. After activity, you need plenty of carbohydrates and protein to get your glycogen stores back to normal and kick off that protein synthesis. Biggest PowerPoint you guys have ever seen so far. Not bad. Only ran it right to our normal time for the most part. Any questions from you guys today? How are we feeling?
Good. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, it was a lot, but that will also kind of act as your sort of textbook, which is kind of nice. So there's a lot of really good, because sometimes the questions you're going to get on the nutrition page are like, what's a good source of protein, and then be like, well, and then it'll have like 4 options. Maybe those options aren't meat options. Maybe it says beans, and that would be a good answer. All right, guys. I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.